In this video, we're going to look at dependency injection. This is a design pattern in which an object receives other objects that it depends on. With the use of this design pattern, we are able to separate the construction of objects from the use of those objects. And that means that classes within a program can be more loosely coupled, which is a desirable thing. It's also desirable that an object that wants to use another object should not have to know how to construct that object. Instead, the receiving object, which is known as the client, is provided with all its dependencies by an external injector of which it has no knowledge. Fundamentally, dependency injection can be achieved in several ways: constructor injection, setter injection, or interface injection. With constructor injection, dependencies are provided via the client's constructor, which means that the constructor will receive references to the objects that it needs and then can store those in member fields. With setter injection, setter methods are called by the injector, and again, the references are stored in member fields. With interface injection, the dependencies interface provides an injector method that injects the dependency into any client passed to it. Because the client doesn't build or find the service itself, it only needs to declare the interfaces of the services that it wants to use, and therefore it should depend on interfaces rather than on concrete implementations. We can provide dependency injection manually, but in a big project that can be a bit of a problem. And that's where frameworks can really help, because they can automate the dependency injection process. In Spring, the inversion of control container that we discussed in a previous video uses the application context to hold the components that are then injected by the framework into objects that require them. In this example, we've got a patient controller class, and we can see that we have this field, which is a patient service, and the constructor has a patient service parameter, and the parameter is stored in the field. So this is an example of dependency injection through the constructor. Because this is a controller and this is a service, those two annotations mean that this class and the patient service class are managed by the inversion of control container, which will manage instances of both these classes and then inject them wherever needed. So the IOC container, when this class is instantiated, will provide a reference rather than the application code having to create the object to pass in as the parameter. Let's take a look at an example using the vowel count application that we've been looking at in previous videos and identify all the places where we are using dependency injection. This controller has got a vowel count service, and that will be injected. Now, we haven't explicitly written the constructor via which the dependency injection will be achieved, because we are using the Lombok annotation that will automatically generate that constructor. In the service, we've got two fields, an application context field and a vowel count repository field. Both of these will be injected by the IOC container. In the repository class, again, we've got the application context and also a JDBC template. Both of these fields will be injected through the constructor. That constructor is provided by this Lombok annotation. Back in the service class, you can see that we're using the context to get a bean called vowel map. Now, in the vowel counter config class, we have a method called vowel map that returns a tree map with string as the key and integer as the value. And all it does is create a new tree map, put in 5 values whose keys are A, E, I, O, U, and the 5 values are all zeros, and then return that tree map. You'll notice that this method is annotated bean, and it's given a scope of prototype. And in the previous video, we learned that prototype means that a different instance will be created for every request. So in the service, we have a request for vowel map, and that will give us a bean. one instance. Lower down here, we are making a second request. That will give us another instance of the bean. And in the repository, when this method is called, the context is used to get a third instance, a different instance of ValMap. The IOC container manages all the instances of this bean, and indeed all the other classes that we've looked at, which makes our application code much simpler, so long as we remember that this dependency injection pattern is being used. I recommend that you do some background reading about some of the terms we've introduced in this video. Dependency injection as a design pattern is a very important one, so you should read about that. And also read about how dependency injection is done in the Spring framework. There is some discussion on the internet about which of the different types of dependency injection should be used, and it would be good for you to look into that discussion. And also learn more about using configuration classes in Spring.